So Carey is going to join us and sort of give us the lowdown on what happened on this case. Carey, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
All
Hello.
right. Thank you for joining me. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I talk about sort of jumping out when on one side you were, taught to talk about science by these scientific groups that were putting out products. What was the light bulb moment that sort of made you start questioning the very people that you were supposed to be writing for?
Well, now I never was supposed to be writing for Monsanto, of course. I worked for Reuters from 1998 until 2015, and that's when I became acquainted with Monsanto. It was my job to learn about their business and write about it for the world and many of their competitors. So I spent a lot of time, as you said, inside their offices, in their headquarters, meeting with their executives and their marketing people and their science and technology people, to not to tell their story necessarily, but to understand from their perspective, what these products that they were rolling out, what they meant for the world and what they were doing to our environment and our human health. And of course, I did hear their message of safety and how they were feeding the world and how this was a wonderful thing for farmers. But I also talked to, scientists and farmers and regulators and lawmakers and grain handlers. And I learned that what Monsanto was saying wasn't always what was truthful on the ground.
Wow. And do you think that's sort of, I mean, since you've written about products that go through, is there something different that happens in laboratories and inside of, the investigation and trials of a product that's different that happens in the world? And what is that tether between those two spaces? Is that where things seem to be falling apart?
I really think so. We've seen this now in a number of different industries with a number of different products. The science that is produced or paid for by the companies that want to sell the products, invariably that science is going to find very few problems with those products, and it is probably going to come forward with a message of safety. Statistically speaking, when you analyze the different studies, those done by the manufacturers of the products find those products to be safer than do independent scientists on a whole, as a general rule. So this was the situation with Monsanto and Roundup. Monsanto paid for studies say the product is safe and it doesn't cause cancer. Scientific studies that we didn't even know that Monsanto was behind, that they ghost-wrote. There's a lot of those out there that told us that Roundup was safe and glyphosate didn't cause cancer. But there are numerous studies, and that's why these juries now twice have found that Roundup causes cancer, because there's so many studies done by independent scientists that show that it's very harmful.
So what is I know with Dwayne Lee Johnson, part of the story, at one point he spilled glyphosate all over his back. I think it was like working with it, he got it all over himself. This is a little bit different case. What makes this case different than the case won by Dwayne Lee Johnson?
Right. I mean, Johnson was a completely different thing. And it was tried like a normal product liability case where all the evidence was tried in one fell swoop in one trial. And he had quite a lot of exposure and a very severe case and is terminal. This case that is currently ongoing in federal court in San Francisco was a lot different. Edwin Hardeman, he's an older man. He's 70 now. He used just Roundup residentially from a 2-gallon backpack sprayer that he would spray up and down his driveway and around his property, where he lived with his wife sort of in retirement. And he developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma. But he also had decades previously of hepatitis C. So, the jury really had to look at Monsanto saying, hey, there are a lot of other factors here. This could have been hepatitis C or other things contributing to his non-Hodgkin lymphoma. The plaintiffs laid out all of the scientific evidence. And the jury came back in the first phase. The judge has bifurcated it into 2 phases. The jury came back on Tuesday after the first phase, after only looking at the scientific evidence, and said, yes, we believe that this Roundup exposure caused Mr. Hardeman's non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And now they're into the second phase, looking at Monsanto's conduct and liability and potential damages.
So Monsanto actually wanted this bifurcated, right? That's one of the things that they asked for, is divide it into two pieces so we can deal with one piece at a time, because I think they also think that talking about money and their responsibility and all of that makes it easier to win the case on the science. So they wanted the science just held all by itself, correct? Isn't that why you make that choice to let us just deal with the science first, so you don't have judgments on, why we were selling it and all the things that are going to come out in their responsibility? Do I have that somewhat correct? Or
Yeah, I mean, the first phase largely excluded any of the evidence of ghostwriting, for instance,
right.
that, Monsanto's secret strategies to manipulate the scientific record, their payments to certain academics and other individuals that were kept under the table, their close relationship with the EPA. All of these sorts of things were excluded from the first phase. Monsanto really wanted to only present scientific evidence. And if you think about it, if you have Monsanto saying, we have these stacks of studies that say it's safe, and plaintiffs say, we have the stack of studies that say it's not, that could be confusing to a jury if they don't have the context about, well, Monsanto has secretly written some of these studies. If you don't
Right.
have that context, it could be very difficult for a jury. And I know the plaintiffs' attorneys were worried. The jury took about a week to come back with a verdict just for that first phase question. But they did find unanimously that the weight of evidence was in favor of the plaintiff.
Wow. I mean, so this was a much more difficult case then to prove. You had less interaction with the product. You had a guy that had other health issues that could complicate the discussion. He's currently in remission, right? Right now, Edwin Hardeman. So he's not got sort of, I'm dying, we need to get through this as part of the energy of the case. And yet they still weighed in favor on the science. I'm sure Monsanto is now really nervous, because you got to imagine, now that the science is against you, now comes the really ugly stuff, the things that you're talking about, the manipulating of the population and the public, and the publicizing of this product. And this is the first case that really has gone into sort of the just the personal use of glyphosate, not as a professional, but really like going to people that are simply using it in their gardens. And there's a lot of people lined up with cases right behind this that are similar, aren't there?
Yeah, oh, definitely. There are some 11,000 plaintiffs. Bayer, Monsanto's new owner, Bayer, has publicly said about 11,000 plaintiffs now are lined up suing Monsanto. There's another trial starting next week in California. It's a husband and wife who both worked outside on their property using Roundup, and both have non-Hodgkin lymphoma. That starts next week in Oakland. They're facing a pretty high hill now here of all of these claims against them, and shareholders are getting pretty worried. They, shares plummeted last August after the Johnson verdict, and they were pushed down again Tuesday after the verdict here in the Hardeman case. They're off about 30%. So investors are very worried about this.
Is there a chance that Bayer, is there any talk that this situation could somehow bankrupt them, or are they so big it won't really matter in the end anyway?
Well, so analysts, some observers are talking about what would it take to settle the cases, and the numbers being tossed around are $3, $4, $5 billion. $3, $4, $5 billion is not going to bankrupt Bayer by any means. Now the other implications though are people are paying attention, and with every trial and with every jury decision, more evidence of the harm associated with this product is coming into the public spotlight. And you're seeing certain retailers move away from it. You're seeing school districts and towns and public parks and things start to say, we're not going to use it anymore. I think you're seeing consumer trends away from the household use. So it's hurting their business as well as hurting their litigation liability.
Do you talk to farmers at all? I was doing an interview on a radio about something totally different, but it was a radio show for farmers, really, and they're like this hooey balooey about organic food, and they're very pro Monsanto, but they have to be, because they've sort of in a way been forced to use it. So this is where agriculture has gone. What are the farmers? Are there farmers worried that this is going to really? If you've been using this for years and years and years, how long does it take to get it out of your soil? If we finally come to the conclusion in America that this stuff is just plain bad, how contaminated are those farms, and how long would it take to restore them?
Yeah. That question is really still being answered in farm country. I am in touch with farmers every day, and they're looking at things. I mean, it depends on the soil, it depends on the use, how much, how long, that sort of thing, what type of soil, what you've been growing there, how often you rotate your crops. But scientists have documented the degradation of soil health associated with long-term glyphosate use, beneficial microbes and bacteria and fungi in the soil that are necessary for plant health, and necessary for environmental health and biodiversity. Those things are being eroded and being damaged by repetitive overuse of this chemical. So it's not just a health problem, it's definitely an environmental problem. We're seeing a loss of certain pollinators. We're seeing glyphosate residues in our surface waters. It's been documented in rainfall. And of course, it's in our food. In terms of residues, it's even found in honey. I was just writing a new story today about glyphosate residues found in honey samples. So, there are a lot of things to think about and talk about when it comes to glyphosate and Roundup.
Wow. I mean, and I imagine our government has got an issue because if you think about one of the things that, I mean, farming, we are exporters of our goods, and so our government's going to have to stand behind our farmers, even though the product might be substandard now because of this. And so then you wonder, is the government going to be on the side of the consumers and protecting us, or on the side of the farmers and promoting the forward use of these products? I mean, this is where it's all these conflicts of interests, I find, that really are making a modern society very, very complicated. And I see it from all sides. I see that, this is sustaining an industry is important. This is one of the most important industries we have. And it's why it's so tragic when companies like Monsanto don't do their due diligence, or that the EPA or groups that are supposed to be investigating the safety don't do it early enough to catch the problem. And now we find ourselves in a place where, I mean, we're going to, if we really come to the conclusion this stuff is awful, we could destroy economies in most of the Midwest.
Well, I mean, farmers have already found, I mean, farmers have been impacted over the years before there were even these cancer concerns per se. There were a lot of concerns about environmental health, and farmers have found it doesn't work as well. They're finding that their plants are not as healthy, their soil is not as healthy. But a lot of them, if they are sort of in this conventional pesticide dependent food production system, if they're hooked on pesticides to grow their foods, they're simply trying to use more pesticides. And, it's a real catch-22 for some farmers. They don't want to be bad stewards of their land. They want to grow healthy food in a productive way that is cost effective for them. I mean, that's what they want to do. Farmers are certainly not the enemy. But how they do it, when you have a big company or two or three, and they're pushing you and they're marketing and they're saying all you need to do is spray your fields with this great chemical and life will be wonderful, they got sucked in. A lot of them got sucked in.
It's really, well, I appreciate that you're following this in the depth that you have. Of course, you're the author of the book Whitewash. You really are into exposing truth. And I think that is something we see less and less in journalism. I almost feels almost non-existent. I think all the money that is, going to Monsanto, and Monsanto's paying this money into advertisers, as is Bayer and pharmaceutical industries. It's getting harder and harder, I think, for journalists to even do their job. And one of the things I always say is, I think journalists want to be covering these stories. I think they really want to be asking the important questions of industries like the pharmaceutical industry. But it gets really difficult when your own paycheck is actually being paid by these people you're supposed to be investigating. Isn't that what you've found, I think, through your career?
Well, my paycheck's never been paid, and at Reuters, we didn't take advertisers. We didn't have company advertisers, so that wasn't an issue, but you definitely feel the pressure. I've seen it, others have seen it. Anyone who questions big, powerful corporate interests, anybody whose work threatens their profit agenda, they come after you, and they've come after me really hard and tried to shut me down and shut me up and try to get people not to read my book, and tried to discredit me, harass me. And it's not just me, I'm one little person. They've done it to a lot of reporters, a lot of scientists. Part of that evidence, is part of the trial evidence. we have documents, internal memos and reports where they lay out how they're going to go after people, how they're going to discredit people. So, yeah, it's a big, scary world out there. There's some very big, powerful companies trying to keep the truth from us. So we just got to keep plugging along and trying to get at it.
Well, I hope you keep plugging along. What's the best way for us to follow the work that you do now in your future stories? Do we just go to your website, or just let me know right now where people can
Gosh, well, Twitter will always get you everywhere. Carey Gillam at Twitter, usrtk.org, US Right to Know. I put a daily trial tracker, a daily blog about all the trial happenings, all the court documents for this Roundup Monsanto case, and of course, a whole array of other food policy issues and food safety issues. And I write for The Guardian and other news outlets on a contributor basis. So,
Awesome.
I'm working on a new story today. So
well,
stay
keep
tuned.
up the work, Carey. I really appreciate you joining us and giving us such enlightening information. And stay safe out there, okay?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.